Hello, everybody. Here are your current events for today, Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. Yesterday, Senator Bernie Sanders formally endorsed former Vice President Joe Biden. Sanders said in a joint virtual meeting about Biden, "We need you in the White House. I will do all that I can to see that it happens, Joe." The two also agreed on forming 6 joint task forces to work on policy matters. These groups will cover the economy, education, criminal justice, immigration, climate change, and health care. Sanders' endorsement of Biden comes 3 months earlier than Sanders' endorsement of Hillary Clinton in 2016. In other political news, it appears that Joe Biden won last week's Wisconsin primary 63% to Sanders' 32%. Also in Wisconsin, the Democrats claimed victory in a highly contested state Supreme Court seat. Many observers see this as a huge win over a President Trump-endorsed candidate, because the court in Wisconsin is currently deadlocked over whether or not more than 230,000 voters in the Badger State would be removed from the voter rolls. It is believed that with the Democrat winning this seat, that they will vote to disallow those 230,000 people from being removed. At least 32 people lost their lives in a 1,200-mile path of deadly storms in the southeast. Over 40 tornadoes impacted 6 states Sunday and Monday. These storms have come at a time when these states are also dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. Those who lost their homes are urged to go to public shelters, but to remember to continue to practice social distancing. President Trump yesterday in his daily White House briefing on the pandemic said that he has total authority over coronavirus restrictions and that he will determine when to lift restrictions imposed by state governors. Now, governors in the West and the East disagree with the president and are forming bipartisan coalitions, meaning Republican and Democratic governors are working together with their neighboring states to determine when to lift the shelter-in-place orders, and they will use data to determine when it will be safe to do so. In many locations in the United States, experts believe that the data is showing a reduction in new cases of COVID-19, and they're saying this is because of the stay-at-home orders, and are hopeful that as early as May, some of the restrictions can begin to be lifted. Today's political cartoon. Even though Bernie Sanders has suspended his campaign to become the Democratic nominee for president, his policies have influenced the Democratic Party. We've seen that earlier with the Joint Task Force. One of the perceived mistakes that Hillary Clinton made in 2016 was that after she won the primaries and was the presumptive nominee, she didn't reach out to Sanders and to try and include him in policymaking decisions, platform decisions, what the party is going to stand for. And that built a lot of resentment among Bernie Sanders supporters. Former Vice President Joe Biden has gone out of his way to try to include Sanders in policymaking decisions. And so his thoughts on injustice, education, income inequality, child care, Medicare for all, poverty, racism could carry over into the Democratic platform and into Vice President Biden's campaign. The issue is that Vice President Biden, in my opinion, is going to have to walk a narrow line. He does not want to appear too far left, which would give a lot of ammunition for President Trump's reelection campaign, painting him as more like a liberal Bernie Sanders than a moderate Joe Biden. So we'll see in the upcoming months how Biden will walk that line between a very liberal policy and his what is deemed moderate policies. Your day in history for Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. In 1865, John Wilkes Booth shoots President Abraham Lincoln while Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater. Booth was part of a conspiracy, a plan, in which at the same night that Lincoln would be shot, attacks would occur with Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward, Seward's icebox. The attacks were done in hopes that it would put the U.S. government into a crisis situation, a disarray. As we know, Booth carried out his attack. The person that was supposed to attack Vice President Johnson chickened out and fled Washington, D.C. William H. Seward was attacked at his home. He and 3 others were injured. However, they all survived. In 1950, President Harry Truman receives National Security Council paper number 68, which called for containing Soviet expansion. This paper develops into what we now call the containment policy. The reason for this policy is that the Soviet Union did not keep its word in agreements made at Yalta with former President Franklin Roosevelt. The agreement that Stalin made with Roosevelt was that any territory taken from Nazi Germany would be allowed to determine their own course of government, free elections. When Stalin did not keep his word and instead turned the occupied territories into communist states, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, President Truman, through his containment policy, draws a line in the sand, saying that Soviet expansion would not come into Western Europe. In our Cold War unit, we'll take a look at the reasons why this occurred. But this was a dominating policy during the Cold War, was to contain Soviet expansion. In 1975, Operation Baby Lift concluded after rescuing 2,600 South Vietnamese orphans. These babies and young children were brought to the United States. The operation lasted for 10 days, even though it got off to a disastrous start. One of the initial flights crashed on liftoff, and it was carrying more than 138 passengers, and mostly children. Those 138 passengers were mostly children, and they were all killed. This operation came at the end of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. North Vietnam had broken the agreement, the peace agreement made with President Nixon. President Ford asked Congress for money to help the South Vietnamese fight off the charging communists from the North. Congress refused, and President Ford made the decision that Vietnam was no longer of an interest to the United States, and the North Vietnamese were allowed to unite Vietnam into a communist country. Well, that's our current events for today, April 14th, 2020. This is Mr. Ruska signing off from the home office. I'll see you tomorrow, and until then, keep calm and keep on reading. See you tomorrow.